Let's talk supply chain. So, welcome to the show, Kai.
Thank you, Sarah. Great to be here.
I am so excited that you're here with me. I mean, what the team at Prompt are doing is really exciting. My background is in logistics, and I've seen so many of the problems firsthand. And that was before adding the pandemic on top of that. So I absolutely love to see brands that are innovating to solve the biggest challenges in this industry, especially when you're striving to provide solutions with minimal disruption and impact to businesses and their existing systems. It's music to all of our ears. So let's dive right in. So, my first question to you is let's start by taking a closer look at Prompt's origin story because the company was only founded in
Mhm.
2020, which means you're still pretty new. And yet, you've already worked with over a third of the top 25 freight forwarders, which is an incredible achievement. So, Robert Petty, the founder, must have really seen a major need. Talk us through that.
Sure. The founding story starts with Lading. So we got to go back there. Lading was founded by Rob at this stage about 8 years ago.
Okay.
And Lading was basically set up as a solutions provider for forwarders on CargoWise. And it was doing things like implementation, it was doing integration, it was doing support. Lading was, in fact, the first partner to be certified platinum in more than four areas. Or maybe more than one area. It's actually certified in four different areas. The partnership network didn't allow for software development, though.
Okay.
So that's where I came in. Rob and I have been talking. I've been in the background of Lading since the founding. We've been talking about opportunities. We've been talking about product gaps in the market. We've been talking about opportunities, issues on the services, the way they're actually being delivered. And we agreed the right course of action at that point was actually to leave the CargoWise network, which is what we did,
Mhm.
and start getting into software, which is where Prompt comes in. And so effectively, you have combining Lading's knowledge on forwarding, the credibility there with CargoWise, and you combine that with effectively, I'll say, Rob's and my experience in information platforms, operations, and our heads really around orienting for real outcomes. Neither of us are really excited by vaporware. We're not really excited by jargon. We just want to get it done.
Yeah,
And so those pieces came together.
I love that. Just want to get it done. And I think, a lot of freight forwarders want to get it done as well, easily and efficiently. Did either of you have a logistics background coming into this, or what does that
Yeah,
look like?
the short answer is Rob's been in the space for 15 years. I've been in for 30 years.
Wow.
So my background started back container shipping,
Okay.
and basically my roles have been joint operations and IT roles for the past 20 plus years. So
Amazing.
it's I'm approaching it from that perspective of how am I getting operational outcomes on
Yeah.
getting things done, and therefore that's where the head's at. It's whether it be people talk about different kinds of technologies about what you can get out of it, where the values are. So we spend a lot of time honing in on those things.
And I'm sure you've seen so much evolution, right? I mean, I've been in the industry 20 plus years and I've seen a ton of
Mhm.
evolution. You must have seen even more.
Okay, well, age gets a little scary here, but yeah, I mean, it's what's interesting. It's also what's old is new again. And I'll
Mhm.
go back to back in the '90s was developing called action-based systems. So an event creating something because if again, this is probably before your time, but you have the dot matrix printers, long large logs of
Okay.
papers. So
Yep.
we started there, right? But then again, we fast forward RFID. How many times does that come back up, right? I
Yep.
still think, frankly, there's a business case under there somewhere but just hasn't come out. So no, it's a lot of changes, a lot of pieces happening. Although interestingly enough, the whole challenge and what Prompt really centered around this whole information platform question, that has been so fundamental for
Mhm.
years. And so pretty much every place I've been for the past 30 years has been some element of building an information platform, making better decisions, being more efficient, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's such an exciting time to be in this industry. All right, so
Mhm.
let's get into what exactly you do at Prompt. How do you help your customers?
So I'm going to answer that question through three lenses, if that's okay, because I think it's important to look at it from that standpoint.
Sure.
For users, we're basically about moving time and attention, right? So if I'm a user, as opposed to having to enter a 20-page commercial invoice and key punch the thing in,
Right.
that can get done in 5 minutes, right? So now
Mhm.
you're moving their load. They don't need to spend that menial time doing that. So from a user's perspective, it's eliminating the mundane rote tasks and allowing them to focus elsewhere, right? From management perspective, obviously they benefit from that user's time and attention and moving that side. But now they also have process consistency.
Mm.
Okay, so from their perspective, they're now looking at it from a, I don't have to worry if this person's doing a little bit different. We'll get more in the details there, but um, that's from a management standpoint. From a conceptual perspective, again, fundamentally, we combine domain expertise in freight forwarding and what we know in logistics and the technical expertise that we have, systems we're using, and we're basically lumping that with data automation. So effectively, so document extraction, integration, information platforms, and at least what we see is our customer centricity. I mean, we're a small entity. We're not a large scale outfit. So we're going to focus on specific customers' needs, understanding what they are. Every forwarder has a different customer base, so maybe retail, so maybe more foodstuffs, et cetera. But then we focus and hone us down on the customer. So it's really those three levels. So again, users, the business side, and then conceptual, how this piece is coming together as competencies.
Amazing. And when I did my research, you say that like businesses are leaving money on the table every day due
Mhm.
to supply chain inefficiencies. And I think that sums it up kind of perfectly, right? So before
Mhm.
we dive into your core solutions, let's
Yep.
talk a little bit about that. What are some of the main inefficiencies and chinks in the chain right now? What are those core challenges you're addressing for customers at Prompt? And have you seen those challenges change, even in the relatively short time since the company was founded?
So if I go back, I mean, if you think about it from managing resources and that side of it, right? Again, you have to think from a couple of different angles here. Certainly, we're focusing on the time and attention, that talent side. We talked about that before. Um, but fundamentally, from a talent perspective, to win the talent war, which is a big deal nowadays,
It
certainly,
is.
you want to get people out of that menial work, right? If they're sitting there doing that, just get rid of that. It doesn't help. You can actually create a better work environment for people. So
Hmm.
if you think about it from that standpoint, they're leaving, I think, a lot on the table. Again, I think things are improving. I think they're realizing that, but that has been a historical issue. Certainly, I think, especially in freight forwarders, they've not focused on integrations as much. They've been doing a lot of manual work, which leads to a lot of process inefficiencies. So you have a direct and indirect aspect, right? So again, I'm
Yeah.
key punching in data versus indirect. Processes are not aligned, right? So person X, I may enter it here, they may enter it there, she may enter it there, that sort of thing. And that makes it difficult for data downstream to go figure out what do I need to do? Do I need to
Hmm.
rekey to get events kicked out? All those kinds of things, right? So there's direct and indirect costs associated with that. Um, Probably the biggest, and again, one of my pet peeves is just information access to make decisions. Again, as a person who was a COO, who ran the operations, I needed to know where things were. If something was changing, profitability changed in a facility, I need to understand. Okay, have orders fundamentally changed? What's happened in those respective areas? If you
Yeah.
don't have the information at hand, you can't make those decisions. And for folks who don't, therefore, have that kind of information pool, slows decisions, they make bad decisions, they react slowly. It's horrible. And there's so
Hmm.
many different opportunities. It's all about squeezing the extra nickel out of the dollar, or the penny out of the dollar, if you want to go that direction. And so those elements, especially that decision point, makes a big deal. And obviously, this just the simplest. The more you put manual steps in place,
Hmm.
the more likely someone's going to miss something. So if you're talking about verifying an inbound invoice, you're counting on somebody to go double check that against. It's just a lot of checking to be done if stuff can be done in automated fashion.
Yeah, and the information gaps, right? Like if you think
Yeah.
about it, for one shipment, there's like 300 emails, I think, that go back and forth,
Oh,
right?
it's insane.
And
Yes.
so if you send an email and the customer is looking for an update, and maybe you're thinking about updating them on the transit time, or maybe it hasn't even been picked up yet, and there's a
Mhm.
problem at the shipper, but you forget to tell the customer about it, and it goes
Yes.
on for 2 days. Like
Yes.
that's 2 days that have gone by that you could have rectified a situation. And that's where that manual information gap is just so critical, because customers are looking for the
Mhm.
freight forwarders to really take responsibility of that and be proactive in the information that they're
Mhm.
giving, so that you can work together in a partnership. And that's really where we're going with that, right? So you have four core solutions. You've got automation,
Mhm.
visibility, integration, and payments. So
Mhm.
let's start with automation. How can it
Sure.
help? What are the benefits? And what are your thoughts on the rising importance of automation within supply chain technology?
Sure. So first of all, let's talk about what prompt automate actually does, because each of these things requires a little bit of definition. A prompt automation, simply said, it's basically taking the information, data from unstructured documents, putting it into a structured format, exporting it and the document to a database, and potentially you're running algorithms that can do things like approve APs within estimates and tolerances. So
Okay.
that's what it does. And again, at broad strokes. In terms of outputs, you're holding down costs. Obviously, going to get a productivity point, retaining time. We talked about that. You're getting more from your people. They can focus elsewhere, and they're paying attention to the right things. So in terms of benefits, it is actually fundamentally it's sold itself. I mean, you go back to your bidding statement of you're working with 8 of the top 25 forwarders or a third of the top 25 forwarders.
Yeah.
We haven't had to sell this. It's been a remarkably huge excited take up. So when you talk about automation, and I think it's important because I think some of the design elements of what we put into this are important. So what I mean by that is so again, let's differentiate a little bit here. So we've implemented it in a hybrid way. What I mean by hybrid is using both a combination of machine learning as well as template based. So when you start talking about documentation, unstructured document, you've got the machine learning and you've got this template conversation. We've actually hybridized it too. What that means is you've got a user who's directing traffic, if you will. There are elements underneath that are being driven by machine learning. I can take you through more detail in due course, but I'm not going to bore you for now. But the outcome of all this, right, is that we have a 98% plus hit rate. Now, you compare that with feedback that we've had from customers of ours who've been using machine learning, completely algorithm-driven tools, getting 70-ish%. That's a 12-fold difference in the error rate. So that we can actually bring that error down to 1.5% as opposed to 30%-ish. Again, 12.5% difference, big numbers.
Well, and the automation that you're talking about is specifically for the documentation, correct?
In this case, yes, it's both it's bringing the documentation, extracting information, and that element of actually importing it or exporting into the databases, as well as that algorithm additional processing that you can put on top of it. I mean, again, people talk about RPA. Again, that's the appropriate jingo. I tend to try to keep it to specifically what you're talking about here. It is an algorithm that can do those additional things. It's not like a virtual robot doing those things.
Yeah.
So from an outcome perspective, you see huge improvements, and folks are able what may have taken a commercial, again, size of commercial invoice matters. A 200-page commercial invoice may take a week for a person to enter. They can do it in 5-10 minutes using the tool.
Amazing. And there's so much information that comes in and goes
Correct.
out for a freight forwarding company. And so I can only imagine. I mean, that's a huge number that you just shared with us. And I can only imagine the efficiencies and how much time people within the freight forwarding industry are just getting back, right? So let's dive into visibility as well. Visibility has to be one of the most important factors in helping to address some of those inefficiencies you talked about earlier, but it's also something that everybody's talking about, right? So, but visibility from where prompt, from your standpoint, is better planning, data-driven insights, right? Those kind of come from visibility. So tell us all about Prompt's portal and business intelligence solutions and how exactly they're helping with visibility.
So first of all, you set the conversation up perfect. I hate to say it, but in the context of, there are a million people doing it, and visibility can use to be in terms and describe a huge amount of span. So again, I want to be specific. We look at, when we talk about our prompt visibility tool, it is about better data and access to the information inside the company's ERP. Okay, so we're not talking necessarily at the moment, we're talking about grabbing it from different terminals. We're focusing on already what's in their ERP, again, for a bunch of different reasons. Our focus and our lift there has been doing that on a cost-effective basis. So I want to be specific and kind of get some numbers. So if you're talking about a typical BI tool, right, just a typical sort of standard BI piece, go back to my prior statement about how important information is, right? A typical BI tool probably costs about, somewhere about $100K, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Plus, you probably SQL developers of some sort who will run you about $180,000 a year, including benefits. What we've actually built is a tool which actually sits on top of Folks Freight Management System at a cost of basically 15% of that, of call it 100K. So basically about 15K a year. That's it. And they can actually then use it using their basic tools, Excel, Access, tools that the customer, their internal people are already used to using, but pre-join that information in a context-specific way. So it just makes it easier for people to get a hold of their data. Now, it doesn't sound super exciting, but for folks who are trying to get the information to make the decisions, to understand, okay, am I making enough money on my pre-pulls or on my chassis days or those kinds of
Right.
things? This makes all the difference in the world.
Hmm.
So again, it's one of those pieces where, again, a lot of uptake. We're seeing a lot of excitement with it. But the whole point there is really about doing it in a cost-effective fashion. There's heaps of competitors out there. We know that. So our focus here is really about how do we do this on a cost-effective basis.
I love that. And freight forwarders love to hear that as well
Hmm.
because they're working on specific margins, right? And
Exactly.
and those
Yes.
margins have to cover a lot of different costs,
Hmm.
especially, and I think we might talk about this when they're covering costs for their customers as far as payment, right? Getting paid from the customer, but also having to pay
Absolutely.
the steamship line as well.
Yeah.
But before we do that, integration
Mm.
also helps to facilitate that improved visibility, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
so important, and we're talking about it more and more. And of course,
Mhm.
at Prompt, you work to expand a company's TMS without actually impacting their existing software, which
Mhm.
is great. So, how does that all work? What can
Mhm.
you integrate with? How do you do it? What are the timings? What does that look like?
So there's, if I can, in what you're saying, there's actually two things that are worth teasing out, if I may, right?
Okay.
One of which is our integration product, right? So Prompt Connect, and the other is actually the product set of Prompt. Okay.
Okay.
Um, so, I mean, as a product itself, again, we said it before, it's about getting information in automated fashion, not having to do the entry and key entries or re-entering, right?
Hmm.
That sort of stuff. Our integrations are typically two-sided. So if you think about, we are working with a freight forwarder and we're working with perhaps a portal like InfoNexus. Okay,
Okay.
so we're working with two-sided integration. So as opposed to us being, let's say, an LSP that operates a warehouse and we're integrating somebody in, it's just important to kind of keep that in mind. But we're integrated with freight management systems. We integrate with platforms like InfoNexus. We've integrated with financial ERPs like NetSuite. So again, all that stuff's pretty straightforward. Again, the normal language that I'm sure you hear. Again, apologies for folks on the jargon. Channels, AS2, APIs, SFTPs, all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Formats, JSONs, X12s, XMLs, all those things, all in the wheelhouse. Strangely
Sure.
enough, CargoWise is actually probably some of the weirdest messages. I'm not sure how familiar you are with it. They have their own universal XML. I know, boring stuff. However, but again, we know that world well enough. But again, fortunately, we're familiar with it. But they're probably the most complicated for better or
Mm.
for worse reasons. Timing varies. Again, typically, if folks have their stuff together, it's about 4 to 8 weeks historically. We're trying
Okay.
to bring that down by 50%. So
Mm.
what we're doing structurally, again, now we still on our Prompt Connect product, we're actually building a semantic grammar. So if we're talking about invoices or purchase orders, there's a certain set of data elements you need to capture that information. BlueJ may hold it as this, CargoWise may hold it as that,
Yeah.
Megaya may hold it as something else, but we're standardizing that language so we can interface on either side pretty neatly. So that's rule number one. And the other side of it, from our perspective, we've solidified and made the processing steps. So if we're validating, um, if we're actually doing some kind of enrichment on the data, if we're doing those kinds of pieces, so enriching is adding additional information to it. Those steps are all in place and all table driven. So it actually simplifies the process and allows the customers to actually get involved in it. So integration embodies those two pieces. Going back to your broader question, which is really how the prompt set goes together. What's important to understand is, I'm going to step back and step into our customer shoes. So if you're a SIVA, for example, um, you're going to look at it and say, I want to limit the people who've got access to my database,
Hmm.
right? So you think about Expediter's potential issue and how that played
Right.
out. So limiting access to the database is important. All of our products can be enabled with a single integration. So once a customer goes live with us with, say, Prompt Automate, we can just layer in every other product with it. So again, they don't need to change the
Hmm.
systems. As you said, we're structured such that we'll work aside our customers' freight management systems, whatever systems they may have,
Right.
but everything works through a single integration. It's that simple. So
Great.
yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds really, really simple, which is good too, because everybody likes that principle, right?
Mhm.
One question for you, because the last one we kind of mentioned was payments. Talk us through what payments look like with Prompt.
I mean, payments is simply, I mean, it's an evolving piece. We're just simply trying, I mean, you mentioned it before.
Yeah.
The fact that So much of this is driven by outlays, and the forwarders themselves are dealing very much a slim margin on
Hmm.
a let's call it on a buy sell side, very much
Yeah.
on so slim margins, cash flow in and out. So prompt pay is effectively just enabling them and getting in the middle of the moment on that.
Okay.
We're that can attach on the back end of the automate side and the
Hmm.
payment approval side, but we're also doing it for people who aren't using that tool. It's still evolving, and we're still rolling that piece out. But at the moment, it's just helping them facilitating global payments.
Love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with me because I was really, really curious about that piece. And so, why is all of this so important? I mean, you have some interesting blogs on
Mhm.
your website, which I encourage our listeners to go and check out. But talk to us about why we should be paying so much attention to things like visibility and data integration. What difference is it ultimately going to make on a business and on an industry wide level?
Boy, a lot of ways to go at this. Again, I'm fortunate. I feel like I'm harping on this. Like, time and attention of people is the most important thing in my view.
Right. Hmm.
It's just, again, it is the scarcest resource out there. Good systems, process, and design. All those things are important. You've got to figure out how to save time and attention for your staff. What does that mean? It means orchestrating your systems, your processes around good decisions,
Hmm.
and making the processes as efficient as possible. I've talked about the information to make those good decisions.
Hmm.
That's an absolutely critical part to what's going on. Um, I would say, thirdly, from our focus, again, and hopefully you hear some of this, is we're not interested in jargon, right? We think a lot of companies have made this process more complicated, more expensive than it needs to be. So we tend to strip things down. We tend to talk specifics. We tend to be very mindful of what technology can and cannot do.
Hmm.
So again, it goes back to when we architect a solution like Automate, we're really trying to think carefully, how's it going to get used? Who's going to use it? How is it
Yeah.
going to, how do we make it easy for the customer to use? We didn't talk much about it, but we actually operate a BPO back end to that. So we can actually do that as a managed service. So if customers say, listen, that change is too much for my people, we'll take that on. So we'll actually
Right.
do the work for them. So we're really trying to make that process easier. Um, Last thing, I think from my perspective, um, logistics technology has just gotten so fragmented, right? And on the other hand, our customers are looking, they've invested heavily in their freight management systems. They've got a strategic imperative to close the gap with digital freight forwarders, Flexport, namely, right? The
Hmm.
kind of thing. And so what we're trying to do is provide those capabilities to close that gap.
Okay.
And especially right now, if you think, again, I look at it and say, you're probably going to have buoyant rates this year and next year
Hmm.
based on where things are going, if you sort of look at trends and cycles, et cetera. And
Yeah.
therefore, there's a time window that forwarders have to close that gap. And I fundamentally think it's really 2022 and 2023. And I think once you get to 2024, rates will start to quote unquote normalize a bit. So there's a lot that needs to get done, and those things need to happen now.
Well, you've heard it here, folks. 2024, which is even further out than I think I've been talking to people
Sorry.
in the industry. No, it's great because that was kind of my next question to you was like, are we going to go back to any sort of normalcy? And you've just answered that question with, guys, you're probably not going to see anything to do with, some sort of normalcy or rate normalcy until 2024. So I appreciate that. When you talk about your offering, you say
Mm-hmm.
that implemented well is on an equal footing with the technology itself, which I absolutely love. So tell us a little bit about what you mean by that and why customers are so important to you.
So if you think about what we wind up doing as we implement it, is to get a good outcome, right? It's
Hmm.
about the products, but there's also they're intimately tied to a process,
Hmm.
if that makes sense, right? So you're talking about at that stage. So if something happens upstream that changes the process, you're therefore that can change how the data comes across integration. So
Yeah.
fundamentally, you're talking about, again, operations. Nothing goes perfect. Nothing goes as planned, right? We've lived this world long enough. We can say that, right?
Yeah.
So how you do things, in my view, makes all the difference, right? So if somebody looks at you, they know that you care, they know that you get the business. Um, and you're focused on their world, right? That's one side of it. The other side of it, which I think is extraordinarily important, is again, it goes back a little bit to my time and attention, but take that from a different perspective. Somebody has gone and chosen a technology provider,
Hmm.
right? And this is not this, especially right now. I don't think people are taking these things very lightly. They're saying, what can strategically get me to the next step? These are
Yeah.
not small investments. It's not small investment in time from their standpoint. So, when they've chosen a partner, I want to make sure that they feel good about that decision at all times, right? Not everything, as I said in the first step, is going to be perfect.
So
Um,
important.
but again, I think it's incredibly important. You want to reinforce that decision every time they engage. You don't want them having to think about it. It's okay. I've got this question. How do I do this? I want to be that first call,
Right.
right? And when
Absolutely.
they've gone through that process and they've gone through it successfully, and they feel like you get my business,
Hmm.
those things happen.
Magic.
And understand again, this is where the operational background is. Having run operations for, it's where my head lies. Is I don't want to have to think about it. Don't sell me vaporware. We are a non-vaporware zone. We will do some things that are solutions and differentiate us from products. Be absolute fair. So again, they can be blips, but it's why it's important to us.
Great. And so, who is an ideal client? I mean, if I'm a logistics firm listening to this, do I need to be a certain size or shape for you to be able to help me level up?
I would tend to argue the first answer is I don't think you need to be of a certain size, but mid to large scale freight forwarders generally will see a larger benefit from our tools. Most
Okay.
of our charges, most of what we do, let's say automate, is really driven by usage from a pricing perspective, how many
Yeah.
pages, et cetera, processed.
Yeah.
So again, you can do it, but really mid to large scale freight forwarders really start to see the benefit. But not just them, also other LSPs.
Hmm.
We're actually we're about to start a pilot with a relatively large, but with a well-known platform, and they're using Automate to do the same kind of thing. Again, folks who are bringing that unstructured information into data form
Hmm.
also makes sense.
Amazing. Amazing. So, now it's time for the case study. Can you
Yeah,
paint us a picture of how you've worked with one of your customers? Like, what was the
sure.
challenge that they came to you with? Which of your solutions were they working with? And what was
Mhm.
the impact or ROI of that solution?
Sure. So DSV purchased Agility Logistics. Headline there was they went through an internal assessment to try to figure out how do they integrate the information, bring the data over from Agility into their environment, to DSV's environment.
Okay.
They looked at it. They started assessing different kinds of options. Their IT infrastructure people said this is going to be crazy possible. Lots of whiteboarding about network connections and all that sort of stuff. And they said this is going to be a multi-month process, 4 or 5 months. It was getting pretty crazy. We sat down with them. We walked through a process, and we figured out a way to use Prompt Automate
Okay.
effectively and get that up within about 3 weeks' time.
Wow.
So
Wow.
again, from an integration that was going to take 5 months down to about 3 or 4 weeks, I think that worked. And so wound up using Automate effectively to bring the data into DSV's environment, effectively using a back-end method off the paper, effectively to get the data in. So
Amazing.
that worked out pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah, so the 3 weeks, what else was the impact or ROI from that solution that you gave them? I mean, obviously time back from 5 months to 3 weeks. You have any other data to share?
I mean, really, this gets to timing and implementation. I mean, people have a necessary need to get the data into their environment, right? That
Yep.
becomes a compliance expectation. So it wasn't really an ROI driven piece as much as this needs to happen. We need to have visibility of information. If you're talking about ROI, Crowley's probably a bit better of an example. They would have used effectively, again, they used Prompt Automate at that stage. They were entering
Okay.
commercial invoices manually.
Yep.
And that basically saved them about, including licensing fees, they saved about 40%. So as
Wow.
again, that's an average.
Yeah.
But again, if larger documents saved, more about 80-ish%, smaller documents probably saved about 60%, but on average, saved about 40% by using our tool.
That's amazing, and I'm glad that you shared that second example with us too, right? Because you shared with us an example of time savings and
Mm-hmm.
then also, um, financial savings as
Mm-hmm.
well, which, everybody is looking at. And we're talking about different products and different services that you can
Mm-hmm.
offer a client. And so they're all going to be unique in their own way as to what they're looking for, what their needs are,
Mm-hmm.
what that impact, what that journey to success actually means for
Mm-hmm.
them. And to showcase that you can help them in either fashion is really great. So I'm glad you shared that with us. So finally then, what does the future hold for Prompt?
So I'll start with the obvious. As you described, we came out of stealth mode in March,
Yeah.
right? So there's a lot of, I'll call it, basic work that we're doing, getting more FMSs in place on the go-to-market side, really over serving the customers as we're rolling out, better articulating the ROIs, all those kinds of things, right? In the short term, we have some agreed pilots underway with some folks that know fairly well that over the course of the next 2-3 weeks they should be hearing
Great.
about. So I'm actually really excited by those because that really starts to expand, I think, our footprint nicely. And finally, again, if I go out a little bit longer term, we're looking, we're fairly involved in, we're looking at additional products as it relates to ports, what the FMC is doing, the FMC data initiative, what's going to impact on communication needs there. There's a lot of spaces. Again, at the moment, we're locking down. If I'm taking a more tactical view for this year, right?
Hmm.
We have a very strong view. The next 2 years are really about arming the freight forwarding community with the tools to move forward.
Right.
And they have some big hits to go. But I'm looking forward to seeing, what you see continued supply chain dispersion to what geographical dispersion from basically was it China to U.S. trade as that disperses, whether it be nearshoring or to alternate sourcing points. What's going to happen with the volatility, trying to bring in
Hmm.
products over different locations. There's a heap of things happening.
Hmm.
So we're keeping our fingers close to that and figure out where are the opportunities, where can we help people actually, again, do the things that we do quite well.
Such an exciting time to be in the industry, and I
Mhm.
can't wait to sort of watch your journey and watch you grow and see how you really are making that impact in the industry. I mean, you're already doing it, but you're going to continue to do that. And so it's such a shame to have to draw our chat to a close. I've just really enjoyed talking to you, Kai. But we continue to face a barrage of challenges in supply chain. And we're often told that technology is the answer, but that's easier said than done, right? As a
Mhm.
busy company, understanding your main challenges and the root of them, how they can be addressed with certain software, how you can actually integrate it, use it, understand it, it can be incredibly overwhelming. So, this is yet another reason that collaboration is the future of business. When you have a partner like Prompt who genuinely understand your set of unique issues and are laser focused on delivering the best outcomes for you with the least disruption, all of that is taken out of your hands so you can focus on success. If you want to find out more, you can check them out at prompt.global. A massive thanks to Kai for joining me and to the team at Prompt for making this episode happen. Thanks, Kai.
Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate it. Thank you.